Welcome to the Best Little Town Podcast, your go-to source for everything happening in the town of Bedford's local government. Whether it's new initiatives or important decisions shaping our town's future, you'll hear it right here. This podcast is dedicated to keeping our residents informed and engaged.
Hello. It is Wednesday, October 29th, and I'd like to welcome you to the Best Little Town Podcast, presented by the town of Bedford in cooperation with our partners at Media Squatch. My name is Bart Warner. I'm your host. I also have the privilege of serving as the town manager, and I'm pleased to join you the day after every council meeting to kind of recap what happens. For those of you who were able to join us in person, we always appreciate that. And for people who catch the live stream, that's great as well. But we also make those meetings available on YouTube. So if you go to youtube.com and search for the town of Bedford, Virginia, you can always find our meeting recordings. And this is just an additional effort to provide information and level of transparency and communication, and sometimes a little bit more explanation behind the activities of town council. Just want to note that, the town is bound legally and, of course, morally by several processes that require us to conduct our business in public at public meetings. So if you ever have a question about a policy or any kind of issue involving town business, the best source of information is to go to the meetings themselves or to review the documentation of those. There's not too much that happens outside of those. So with that said, I'm going to jump into last night's activities. Prior to the regular council meeting, we did have a work session at 6 o'clock with our finance director, Ann Cantrell, who reviewed our first quarter financial statements and our budget. And we always kind of take a look into that on a regular basis to see how we're doing compared to how we plan to do each year with our budget activities and our financial activities. Ann noted some changes year to year that we had accounted for in the budget. Wasn't really anything unpredictable. So far, we are on track to do what we expect to do in the fiscal year. Of course, that's not unusual in the first quarter. There aren't too many surprises that hit us at the beginning of the year. That work session was adjourned, and we went into the regular meeting at 7 p.m., which began with approval of the minutes from the October 14th meeting. Of course, those were approved. Next item on the agenda was the report of the town manager. I reminded folks, and I'll do that again right now, that the town follows the annual holiday schedule posted by the Commonwealth of Virginia. And between now and the next meeting of council, there are 2 holidays during which town offices will be closed. The first is Election Day on Tuesday, November 4th. The second one is Veterans Day on Tuesday, November 11th. Also noted that we would be requesting an addition to the meeting agenda that was published related to the dedication ceremony for the Bedford Vietnam Veterans Memorial. That ceremony will take place in front of the courthouse on Saturday, November 22nd from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Although staff has been working with the organizers of that event since April and have advised that the event was approved already through the administrative process, the organizers had requested a formal street closure and acknowledgement by town council, and we acknowledged that we were happy to do that. So I gave council a heads up that we would be amending and revising the agenda when we got to that portion of the meeting. I concluded my report by turning things over to Police Chief Jim Moore for very special recognition of some of our police staff. The first person that was recognized was Captain Stephen Swain. Mr. Swain was promoted and assigned to the position of operations captain recently. He's been a really strong performer in our police department, a strong visionary leader, and this promotion recognizes that and also recognizes the value we place on him in the future and the future activities of the police department. We also recognized Officer Sabry Parker for successfully completing the police academy and the field training officer process. Officers Whitney Arney and Joshua Dietrich recently completed the police academy. And we also have two recent recruits, Christian Dillard and Marcus Olson, who made it through the selection process to start working for the police department and who will actually start the police academy themselves in January. Of course, it was a pleasure for me to introduce those folks to both council and the community at the meeting, and we also appreciate the support and the round of applause that they received and the support in general that the community provides for our police department. The next item of business on the council agenda was appearances before council. We had 6 citizens rise to speak. The first was Leslie Mahaffey. She was addressing the proposed amendment of Section 2-27 of the Town Code, and that, of course, dealt with a potential change in meeting dates. She said that she was generally opposed to the original proposal, which was to move to 1 meeting a month. She shared her view that council should be available at least twice a month and requested that she did acknowledge the fact that council occasionally does cancel meetings based on conflicts with holidays and then sometimes when there are not items of new business, and said she recognized that there was items on the agenda last night to do just that in relation to Thanksgiving and Christmas, but shared her opinion that come January that council would continue to meet twice a month. She shared her opinion that if there was a change to the meeting date to allow citizens to attend both the town council meetings and the board of supervisors meetings, she would suggest changing the meeting dates to the first and third Tuesdays. Next speaker was Jennifer Cohn, who also spoke against the idea of changing the meetings to once a month. She shared her view that she thought it was important for people to see each other face to face, and her opinion that this reduces animosity and eliminates potential political problems that may exist elsewhere in communities that probably don't have the level of civil discussion that we have here in Bedford, and that's certainly something that should not be taken for granted. The next speaker was Jonathan Hayden. Jonathan is involved in the annual tree lighting event that takes place in Centertown Plaza on the first Saturday in December. Jonathan came last year and requested some funding from council to assist in purchasing additional decorations for that event, and he was requesting that same level of funds as last year. This is based on an idea of continuing to improve the event and also the fact that the event itself will be expanded greatly this year. In addition to the Christmas parade in the morning and the tree lighting that occurs at 6 p.m., there will be additional street closures downtown, pretty much in the footprint of our Centerfest event as well, where we encourage folks to come and enjoy Christmas in Bedford and the kickoff to the season in that first weekend in December. Jonathan noted that last year he came and requested funding and the town was able to accommodate that. Again, that's something that we can handle administratively, and council directed me to do so, but I noted that we would get together with John and work something out and that I would report the results of that at the next meeting. Next speaker was Cynthia Gannot. Cynthia expressed her thanks to council for their community service and representation. She also stated she was against decreasing the number of monthly meetings because that defeats the purpose of representation. She also noted that it is best to conduct all business in public by council. And there is a lot of activity that occurs on a regular basis, including the good work performed by our appointed commissions and agencies. She suggested that if there was a reduction in the number of meetings, that perhaps council should reduce the salary that they are paid, and noted that other appointed board members, including planning commissioners and members of boards like the Town Economic Development Authority, are not paid for their service. Next to speak was Anne DeLong, who also expressed her opposition to going to 1 meeting per month. She shared her view that it's good for residents to engage with council personally and appreciates the effort to interact with council in response to the county's change in meeting dates and appreciates the complication that posed in terms of our meeting date. Again, to hop off briefly, the town council has met on the second and fourth Tuesdays for a long, long time. The county board of supervisors typically met on the second and fourth Mondays, and they recently enacted a change to their date where they moved to Tuesdays. So for the past month or so, there's been a situation in which the elected bodies representing all of our citizens happen to be meeting at the same date and time. So that was the background for the discussion which took place last night. Again, getting back to Mr. Long's comments, she felt like the change to once a month was a separate topic, but she was not in favor of it, and she favors providing opportunities for direct communication between citizens and their representatives. Final speaker was Mr. Bill Mosley, and Bill noted an issue with the publication of the agenda itself, that it needs to be more specific. In fact, the point was that the item that most people were speaking about last night dealt with the change in meeting date, and that was not specifically presented in the agenda as published. He requested that we include more detail about what is specifically involved when we put out the agenda in an effort to be more user-friendly. Moving on, the next item was council comments, and that's where the members of council typically go around the dais, and each member is given an opportunity to speak. Beginning last night with Councilman Stacy Haley, he thanked all the people who were personally in attendance and also thanked the police department personnel for their service and their attendance. Next, Councilman Todd Foreman, again, thanked everyone who was present, noted that council members do hear what people are saying and they are receptive to that and do take that into account. He also recognized Ken and Linda Parker of the Bedford Boys Tribute Center. They recently traveled to Normandy and presented a plaque and placed a plaque at one of the historic sites there that is really dear to the identity of our community. And Todd recognized their service in perpetuating the history and the connection, the personal connections in particular, to that tragic day and the sacrifices of our community and the work that Ken and Linda perform at the Bedford Boys Tribute Center, which is located on North Bridge Street, downtown in Bedford. Next was Councilman Jay Ippolito, who also thanked everyone in attendance and made a point to thank each individual who had spoken as part of the appearances before council and the other folks for appearing. Vice Mayor Darrell Updike likewise expressed his appreciation to everyone who made the effort to come out physically. Noted the renovation of the former Bedford Middle School / Bedford High School in the middle of the town, and noted that there was a public tour offered last week by the developer of that, Dave McCormick of Waukesha Development. Vice Mayor Updike shared his view that Mr. McCormick has done a wonderful job in renovating that old building. Vice Mayor Updike also noted that the council had a strategic planning meeting this past Saturday on October 25th, shared his views that it was a very good meeting and that council has identified areas that need to be addressed and that will be brought up and be continued to be reported upon in the future. Next was Councilman Dwight Evans, who likewise expressed his appreciation for those who were in attendance, noted that he appreciated the public comments he received as well. Dwight also shared news of a resident who recently celebrated her 100th birthday, Miss Ada Eubank, and Dwight was able to participate in that commemoration, and along with him, we'd like to send our best wishes to Ms. Eubank as well and wish her many more years of health and happiness. Next was Councilman David Foster, who likewise thanked everybody for being present, spoke to the fact that Friday is Halloween and reminded people to be aware of people who are out trick-or-treating, particularly after dark and in parts of town and streets that visibility may be a little bit compromised. He also encouraged people to vote on Election Day. And as a Marine himself, noted that November 10th is the birthday of the Marine Corps, and brought that to the attention of everybody and shared best wishes toward the branch of service in which he served our country as well. Finally, Mayor C.G. Stanley concluded council comments by saying he enjoyed seeing the new police hires and new employees in general. He noted that he recently attended a ribbon cutting event at the YMCA out off 460 on the western part of town. And that dealt with some new equipment and a renovation at that facility. He also noted the event at the former Bedford Middle School, which was a ribbon cutting for the Flora Apartments on October 22nd. Shared his view that it looks really nice in terms of the aesthetics of what's been done there. And in particular, CG shared his recollections of the tragic fire that occurred on that site back in 2020 and just said he was glad to see that both the community and the site itself recovered from that event. He also noted that in addition to the Flora Apartments, there is a boutique hotel that is included as part of that project in the building next door that has been affectionately known as Old Yellow. And that should be coming up with its own groundbreaking not groundbreaking, but ribbon cutting sometime early next year. He also noted that he thought town council had a very good work session on Saturday and has developed a good vision for the future and a timeline for getting things done. Moving along was a report of council committees. There were none. In fact, council does have some standing committees that are identified in town code, and when it's appropriate to do so, there's often specific topics that are referred to committees for further discussion and work. However, a majority of members of this council have indicated a preference to have work sessions where everyone is present and gets the same information. So just as a little bit of background, we always have that on the agenda, and when we say that the committees didn't meet, it's because there were no specific topics referred to those committees. There are sometimes discussions that take place outside of the regular meeting, but no business is ever transacted there. Again, it can't be, but that's for the purpose of diving deeper into the details and some operating details and some specific things related to legal restrictions and procedural matters that are important and that typically might drag things out in a public meeting. And we had a little example of that last night, which I'll get to later, but that's why council occasionally will go into closed session to talk about some details that are sensitive in nature. Typically, those deal with negotiations on property when either somebody approaches us or we're looking at doing something else, but it's things like that would not be appropriate to be discussed. Although, again, no action is taken. So ultimately, if anything comes of those discussions, they find their way to the public meeting agenda and action is taken. So just wanted to offer a bit of expansion on that part of the agenda. The next was revisions to the agenda, and as I had reported earlier, staff requested a formal street closure related to the dedication of the Bedford Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and that was unanimously approved by council. Next item on the agenda was a public hearing dealing with a proposed zoning map change. That's tax map number 156A-10T, and going back to a comment made previously, that was dealing with the property at 1333 Longwood Avenue. The specific request was to change the zoning for the property located at 1333 Longwood Avenue from residential R2 to general business B2, and the request was made by the property owner. The first speaker was the property owner, Ms. Hope Metzger. She noted that she purchased the building that many people remember as Longwood Florist. That business was discontinued and the building sat vacant for a little bit, and Ms. Metzger took that over and has since been operating her real estate business out of that particular site. She noted that she wants different zoning because technically R2 does not allow office use, which is what she's currently doing. and also noted that for all practical purposes, her property is treated as a commercial property, including the legal description on the county GIS, her electric rates, and her tax rates. She noted that she employs 30 people there and takes pride in her business in town, and that, like the middle school, she has also revitalized this building. Again, the primary issue is the nature of zoning itself. While that building is a commercial building and has been for some time, it actually predates the zoning that was applied by the town. So this will come up later in some other comments in the public hearing. Next was, speaking along with Ms. Metzger was her a co-worker named Samantha, who noted that in the 1960s, the business opened at that location. It was built as a business, and that the R2 residential zoning was applied thereafter. Again, she reiterated that other than the zoning, it is treated as a commercial property. It's in terms of electric rate, and it's billed as a business. Ultimately, it's a business that is zoned residential. They shared a concern that if something were to happen to the property, that the insurance claim could be denied to rebuild it. There was previous discussion by this at the Planning Commission meeting, and of course we'll get to that in the new business presentation. The Planning Commission had noted concerns about what's called spot zoning, and we're going to talk a little bit about that more later in this podcast, and that also occurred at the meeting. But basically what Ms. Metzger was saying, that really what she wants is to promote the historical and best use, and she also suggested that the general business B2 designation itself might not be what was best for the property here in the surrounding community, and suggested that perhaps it would be better for her to rezone it to a different category, but ultimately her view was that the current R2 zoning did not meet her needs. The next speaker at the public hearing was Ms. Carol Lacey, who lives across the street from the property in question. She shared her concerns that a move from R2 zoning to B2 zoning would open the floodgate of possibilities in terms of what can happen on the property itself. In that regard, she checked the list of allowable uses in B2, that is an extensive list, and also shared her view that the zoning of a property does not go with the owner of a property, but is applied to a lot and to the property itself. She shared her view that if this zoning change were approved, a new owner could do several other things, and shared her concern about spot zoning. I will dive off here for just a minute to explain that concept. Zoning in general is a fairly complicated issue, and again, that was evident last night. We'll talk more about it, but in the manner in which it is applied, basically zoning defines how properties can be used, and it deals specifically with use along with some design considerations. And in applying zoning, there's some requirements, and there's been some case law supporting this, that it needs to be applied broadly in areas defined for certain purposes, rather than assigning zoning to individual parcels, even though the uses might be different in adjacent areas. And that's what was done many, many years ago in this area. Even though there are different uses along the streets, the zoning for that category was applied as residential because a majority of the properties in this area are, in fact, homes and residential areas. Getting back to Ms. Lacey's comments, she noted that there are several other non-residential uses within residential districts. And just in the area of Longwood itself, there are churches, there's a Masonic lodge, and there's actually a gas station located along the street, and all of those are within the residential districts. Ms. Lacey also noted that there had been a previous request to have tiny homes available for sale on the lot in question, and that request was turned down. She also asked that this request be turned down, but she did share her view that Ms. Metzger does maintain her property well and appreciates the existing level of activity there and how it is maintained. With no further speakers, the public hearing for that was closed, and we then moved into the consent agenda. First item there was appointment of members to the Economic Development Authority. Last night, council reappointed Jonathan Buttram and Michelle Crumpacker to serve on the Economic Development Authority with their terms to expire November 30th, 2029. On a motion by Councilman Haley, seconded by Vice Mayor Updike, that was unanimously passed. Next item on the consent agenda was the item that we added, and that was a request to close streets. The Bedford Vietnam Veterans Memorial requested permission to hold a dedication ceremony in front of the county courthouse on Saturday, November 22nd from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and to close East Main Street between Bridge Street and South Street for that purpose. As part of that request, Town Council was requested to approve closing the streets in conjunction with that event. Mr. Doug Berry, who has been involved very heavily with that project and working hard on it, provided some more details about both the memorial itself and this proposed event, and noted that there's been great interest and great response to it. And in fact, while the event is scheduled to take place from 11 to 12, it's likely that they're going to need some more time to set up and take down. So he asked that the street closure actually be expanded from beginning at 9 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. And then, of course, we interjected from council stating that while we would appreciate council to consider that, if Mr. Berry or the organizers find that they actually need a little more time either way, that town staff will certainly do what we can to accommodate that. On a motion by Vice Mayor Updike, seconded by Councilman Foreman, council voted unanimously to close East Main Street between Bridge Street and South Street from 9 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. for the dedication ceremony of the Bedford Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And again, if you're interested in attending that event, Saturday, November 22nd, the actual event will begin at 11 o'clock a.m. Moving on, the next item of discussion was old business, which was amendment of Section 2-27 of Town Code. For those of you who are not familiar, and given the fact that it was not specifically spelled out on the agenda, that was a proposal to consider changing the meeting dates and times for regular council meetings. Currently, Section 2-27 of Town Code, well, as of last night, until last night, and until January, that section of code states that town council's regular meetings will take place on the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month at 7 p.m. This came up in response to an action taken by Bedford County, which I mentioned previously, wherein the Board of Supervisors recently changed their meeting dates in a way that matched up exactly with what our code-driven meeting dates required. So in response to that, council engaged in some pretty robust discussion about changing both the dates and the frequency of the meeting. The original proposal for consideration at the October 14th meeting was to move to one meeting a month, beginning at 6 o'clock p.m. on the third Tuesday. That did not pass, and in fact, that motion was tabled. So the motion to table indicated that it was tabled until last night's meeting. So the first item of business was to take the tabled item off the table so they could discuss it. That motion was made by Dave Foster, seconded by Jay Ippolito, and unanimously passed. Then Councilman Todd Foreman made a motion to move the meeting date to the first and third Tuesdays at 6 o'clock p.m. with an effective date of January 2026. That motion was seconded by Councilman Dwight Evans. Discussion of that motion ensued, and Councilman Stacey Haley shared his view that the change to 6 o'clock p.m. was problematic and requested that that motion be amended. Since Councilman Foreman made the motion, he acknowledged that he was accepting of that proposed amendment, so the motion then became changed to move to the first and third Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Councilman Haley then further offered an amended motion to keep the current meeting date and time in place, and there was discussion of that amended motion. Mr. Haley noted that the town council has met on the second and fourth Tuesday for over 75 years. Also shared his view that the council should not have to make a decision based on a change made by the county. He shared his strong desire to preserve the existing meeting date and time and noted the possibility that the Board of Supervisors may actually change their meeting times back to Mondays based on the way they manage that under their form of government and their bylaws. Darrell Updike echoed the frustration as to why council is at this point, and shared the disappointment and frankly a little bit of the angst of having to do that in response to a change made by the county. But he also shared his view that he felt like council needs to be available for the citizens, and the adjustment was necessarily to be fully accountable and to allow people to fully participate with all of their elected officials. Councilman Foreman noted that keeping the same date would create conflict in terms of the ability of citizens to attend both meetings. And Darrell Updike also shared an example to support his argument from the last meeting, in which we had a joint proclamation honoring someone, a veteran who was observing their 100th birthday, but the honoree actually could not attend both meetings and wound up at the Board of Supervisors meeting, which was certainly appropriate, and I don't think anybody had any misunderstanding about that, but Darrell shared his view that it would have been nice for us to have the opportunity to honor him as well, particularly since we participated in the joint proclamation. Again, going back to Mr. Haley's motion, his motion was to amend the motion on the table to change first and third Tuesdays back to the original date of second and fourth Tuesdays. That motion was seconded by Jay Ippolito, and at that point in the meeting, Robert's Rules of Order crept in, and this is where lawyers and bureaucrats unfortunately make our money. It'd be great if we didn't have to interject. At that point in the meeting, if you're watching, we interjected that the question was to amend the motion that council would ultimately consider. The vote on that was not to actually take action. So when it came time to vote on that, that motion failed. Councilman Haley and Councilman Ippolito voted for the motion to amend what was being considered. Vice Mayor Updike, Councilman Evans, Councilman Foreman, Councilman Foster, and Mayor Stanley all voted no. That led back to the original motion, which, keeping track, if you're watching the video, was made by Councilman Todd Foreman to amend Section 227 of the Town Code to change the regular meeting date of council to the first and third Tuesdays of each month at 7 p.m., and that change would take effect in January of 2026. When the roll call vote took place on the original motion, that motion passed 6-1. Councilman Ippolito, Councilman Foster, Councilman Evans, Vice Mayor Updike, Councilman Foreman, and Mayor Stanley voted yay. Councilman Stacey Haley voted against. This means that effective in January of 2026, that town council meetings will take place on the first and third Tuesdays of each month. That is basically the only change, although it is a fairly significant one. From a staff perspective, we appreciate council giving us till January to implement that, because it does create some work and some complications for us as well. But as I invite people to participate in our meetings, beginning with the next calendar year, those meetings will take place the first and third Tuesdays of each month at 7 o'clock p.m., and that also eliminates the current conflict with the Board of Supervisors meeting. The next item on the agenda, we moved into our new business section, and the new business dealt with the rezoning request. On September 4th, 2025, the Planning Commission held a public hearing to discuss a recommendation for a request to rezone property located at 1333 Longwood Avenue from medium-density residential to general business. Of course, the property was previously Longwood Florist and is currently an office used for real estate sales and log home sales, which the Commission recognized as a legal non-conforming use. This property was the subject of a zoning map change request previously in May of 2023. At the public hearing for the Planning Commission, the property owner spoke in favor of the request. No other citizens spoke. the applicant wished to change the zoning to increase the future sale value of the property for additional commercial purposes and to increase traffic to the site with retail sales. Commissioners expressed concerns with not knowing what specific commercial uses were requested and which of the more intense B2 uses could be permitted from those allowed in the ordinance. The discussion also involved concerns with changing the use solely for personal financial gain, commercial uses intruding on adjoining residential uses, negative impacts to the community, and spot zoning. A motion to recommend denial of the zoning change passed on a vote of 7-0 by the Planning Commission. The commissioners determined that this rezoning would constitute a spot zoning while confirming that the existing non-conforming office use could continue. A motion to deny the request before council was made by Mayor Stanley and seconded by Vice Mayor Updike. There were a lot of questions about what the applicant's intended use was. I think everybody recognized, again, the conflict between the existing use and the zoning and the non-conforming status. A little bit of background there. Again, I described the way zoning is applied. The primary feature of zoning is defining what is allowed to happen on a property and the specific use. The way Bedford's ordinance is structured is in each district there are a list of land uses that are allowed by right, which means if you want to build a house in a single-family home in an R1 district, actually a single-family home in pretty much any residential district, that's allowed as long as you meet the setback requirements and other design requirements. You just have to get a zoning permit and a building permit. Within each district, there are typically conditional uses, and those are things that might be a little bit more intense than what is allowed by right. Sometimes in a residential district, for instance, it might be possible for a conditional use such as a school or something like that to occur, but it's not allowed by right because it is different than what is typically associated with a residential district. We did have a recent zoning enforcement case involving something like that. But in those cases, it's possible for the property owners to request that more intensive use if it's allowed as a conditional use, but that just means they have to get approval through a public hearing process before both the Planning Commission and the Town Council. Actually, let me step back a second. The Planning Commission reviews these cases and really gets into the details of them and makes a recommendation to the council. The Planning Commission is an advisory body, and so the motions that they pass are recommendations to council. Ultimately, it is up to Town Council to take formal action on all requests, and that's what they were doing last night. After discussing the nature of that, again, going back to it's possible to have a building, particularly one that was built before our zoning ordinance existed, that does not comply with zoning, but what we say is that is essentially grandfathered and it's non-conforming, but it's legal. So the issue there is if a legal non-conforming use exists, that's okay because, again, there's history there and there's documentation as to why that is the case. Those are allowed to continue. And we also had a little bit of discussion with the town attorney about that, about the concerns of, if a building were lost to fire or something like that, based on case law and the advice the town attorney gave was that the building could be rebuilt for the same use. It just could not be rebuilt and used for something more intensive. So that was one concern that the applicant raised. The other concern raised by the applicant was some apparent confusion about what they wanted to do and what was the best zoning and the relationship of non-conforming uses. We attempted during the meeting to try to provide some guidance to the applicant as well as provide some background information to that. But again, the applicant noted that really B2 probably wasn't the best category for what she wanted to do, but she didn't really know what to ask for. But then the discussion became what the future use might be, and there was no apparent information or specifics shared about that. So again, ultimately, staff and the town attorney offered to meet additionally with the applicant to try to explain things. And of course, also, if we can, to explain more broadly how zoning works, which is a complicated discussion that won't happen quickly or easily, but again, we are happy to engage in that. A lot of that discussion took place after the vote. The vote to deny the rezoning request was unanimously approved by all members of council. And again, we do understand that the applicant had some questions, but we are happy to talk to them further about process and explain how things might work. But for both the interests of the applicant as well as the neighbors, again, it's possible for things to exist that do not meet the current zoning. But typically, while those are allowed to continue if they're not changed, any change that is more intensive, and when I say more intensive, generates more traffic, the need for more lighting, just generally more activity, that is not allowed, and that typically requires a rezoning or some kind of other relief. Moving on with the remainder of the agenda, the next item was a first quarter recoveries budget amendment. As of September 15th, there were several recovery revenue items that originated primarily from our insurance carrier, the Virginia Risk Sharing Association. These items include recoveries for guardrail damage at Blue Ridge Avenue, a Bedford County contribution to fire department personal protective equipment, vehicle repairs in the police department, damaged pole transformers, the damaged light control box on Main Street, the sale of a tractor, and underground fees charged for development. The expenses related to these items either have been paid by the operating departments or been encumbered by those departments, and so staff had to request a budget amendment to appropriate the revenue from our insurance company to those general ledger accounts for the activities I just described. Motion to approve was made by Councilman Stacey Haley, seconded by Jay Ippolito. One of those items in specific is a light control box at the corner of Main Street and Court Street. If you travel down East Main Street, you probably noticed a black metal box that's currently being held up by, well, frankly, unsightly yellow straps. That was hit by a motorist several months ago. It was secured by the electric department to keep the light operating and, basically stabilize the situation, but it's obviously not a very attractive arrangement. Councilman Ippolito asked about the status of that repair, and I was able to note that the materials to replace the box should be received next week. And in fact, I've lost track of how long ago it's been since the damage occurred, but it's taken us that long to get the materials and the replacement parts. Unfortunately, the specific expertise related to performing the work is outside of the abilities of our electric department, so we have to secure an outside vendor to do that. So while the replacement parts will be here next week, it's going to be a little bit longer than that before that's fixed. The motion to approve the budget amendment was unanimously passed by all members of council voting aye. The next item of business was a resolution dealing with donation of surplus equipment. Our Public Works Director, Tom Woodard, requested permission to donate surplus equipment to a nonprofit organization. The list of items to be donated include a 2004 Ford Taurus, a 1995 Chevrolet S10 pickup, a 1995 GMC tractor, and a Massey Ferguson tractor of indeterminate age. Staff requested council to adopt a resolution in support of donating surplus equipment to a nonprofit organization. That motion was made by Councilman Haley, seconded by Vice Mayor Updike. As part of the discussion, we were able to advise council that the intended nonprofit organization in this case is actually a museum. So someone made a comment in passing about that's probably where these things belong, and that's probably where they're going to end up. That motion was unanimously approved with a positive vote by all members of council. The next item of new business was a resolution changing the date of the first council meeting in November. The first town council meeting in November is scheduled for November 11th, which falls on a town holiday. Based on that conflict and the fact that offices are closed, council was requested to adopt a resolution to move the regular meeting scheduled for November 11th to Tuesday, November 18th. Councilman Jay Ippolito made a motion to approve that resolution. It was seconded by Councilman Dwight Evans and unanimously approved by a vote of all members of council. In a similar vein, the next item of new business was a resolution canceling the second regular council meetings in November and December of this year. The second town council meeting in November falls on November 25th, which is during the week of the Thanksgiving holiday. And the second council meeting in December is scheduled for December 23rd, which falls pretty close to the Christmas holiday. Based on the likelihood of travel for both staff and council members, council was requested to adopt a resolution canceling the second council meeting in November and December, which would be November 25th and December 23rd, on a motion made by Councilman Haley, seconded by Councilman Evans, that also unanimously passed. That was the conclusion of our business. It was there weren't a lot of items on last night's agenda, but the ones that were, a couple of them were rather complicated. So if you watched us last night, if you were there, if you have any questions about those things, feel free to contact us, and feel free to contact us anytime. Of course, the main telephone number at Town Hall is 540-587-6001. Except for holiday closures and except for the rare foul weather event, we are open Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Please note that our treasurer's office does close the door at 4:30 p.m. And while we regret the inconvenience for some of our customers, that's due to the fact that in addition to receiving payments, they also have to process those payments and do several other administrative tasks that are often mandated by state law. We encourage people to join us whenever you can for council meetings. The next council meeting will be Tuesday, November 18th at 7 p.m. After that, the next council meeting will take place on Tuesday, December the 9th. So moving past those, beginning in January, we will move to our new meeting schedule, which is the first and third Tuesdays of every month at 7 p.m. So just wanted to make folks aware that there's a lot of flux in terms of our regular meeting dates coming up. For the next couple of months, we will have one meeting each month, coincidentally, but that relates more to the holiday schedule than an effort to change things overall. The next meeting again will be November 18th, followed by December 9th, and after that we will revert to our twice monthly schedule, but that will take place on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. If you've listened to me for this long, I thank you very much for your patience and indulgence. I do appreciate the opportunity to serve you in this community. There are a lot of really active things happening in the community. There are a lot of changes taking place. I noted at the ribbon cutting for the Flora Apartments, Bedford is in the process of becoming something that we've never really been before as a community. So we're seeing a lot of growth, a lot of interest, and that's exciting, and we appreciate that. Of course, we also recognize that that comes with challenges as well, and also with varying opinions. And we appreciate the fact that the government process is complicated, slow, and frankly, sometimes frustrating for our citizens. Unfortunately, a lot of that's by design, but as some of our speakers who appeared before council noted, one of the great things about this community is the ability to talk candidly and freely with one another, but in a civil manner. And we don't take that for granted, particularly when we know darn well that some of what is happening is very personally aggravating. So I think that's just one aspect, the quality of citizens we have and the people who live here that combine and contribute towards our goal of making Bedford truly the world's best little town. That remains our goal and will remain so. Hopefully we reach it, but if we don't, we'll keep striving. And in that regard, I thank you very much for your contribution to it. As the weather turns colder, I hope that folks are comfortable and don't encounter any complications from that. Just another example of the change that's always constantly happening around us. Till I join you again on this podcast, I wish everybody well, and thank you very much for your attention and your contributions to our great community.